Go now.
Don't do that to
Oh my God!
Courtrooms are supposed to be places of order, where justice plays out under strict rules. But what happens when those rules break down? In one case, a convicted killer tried to escape the moment he was sentenced, sending a courtroom into chaos. In another, a man threw his waist at his attorney after receiving a 40-year sentence. These wild outbursts turn what should be serious moments into scenes straight out of a drama. But what is it about these moments that pushes people to the edge and erupts into chaos? Case number 1. Michael Thomas's courtroom outburst was nothing short of chaos. After being sentenced to 35 years in prison for the murder of Sharon Staples and her unborn baby, tensions were already running high. Thomas had a long criminal history, including an extensive juvenile record, and was supposed to be in custody when the murder occurred. Instead, he was out, driving a stolen minivan with 2 accomplices when he saw Staples walking with her 13-year-old son. What started as an attempt to steal her purse ended in tragedy when Thomas shot her and fled the scene, only to return moments later to take the purse. As the sentence was handed down by Judge David Borowski, things quickly spiraled. Thomas had remained relatively calm up to this point, but that calm shattered as he stood to leave. Flanked by sheriff's deputies who sensed something might go wrong, Thomas suddenly made a break for it. His attempt to escape sent the courtroom into pandemonium. Deputies immediately sprang into action, with one throwing his weight down on Thomas's shoulders, forcing him to the ground. But Thomas wasn't giving up that easily. As he struggled against the deputies, chaos erupted in the public gallery where 24 of his supporters had gathered. One woman's voice stood out, shouting, "Don't do that to him," as deputies wrestled Thomas into submission.
Don't do that to
Even with handcuffs and shackles, he continued to squirm and resist. Thomas's mother could be heard calling out words of comfort to him as the deputies struggled to get the situation under control. It took 3 deputies to finally subdue him and drag him toward the exit, but not before he threw himself to the ground again, reigniting the chaos. Despite the turmoil, the deputies eventually managed to get Thomas out of the courtroom. His supporters, however, didn't leave quietly, requiring additional officers to step in and restore order. The incident was a stark reminder of how quickly emotions can escalate in the courtroom, especially when a loved one is sentenced to spend decades behind bars. Case number 2. Judge Herndon versus Kim Blandino. In one of the more bizarre moments in the courtroom, Judge Douglas Herndon found himself facing not only Gary Walters, who was there to settle a dispute over restitution payments, but also a man named Kim Blandino, an uninvited guest with a knack for causing chaos. Walters was in court for failing to pay the required restitution for financial crimes he had committed. But just as Walters was making his case, Blandino, sitting in the public gallery, decided to make himself part of the proceedings. Blandino wasn't shy about interrupting. He stood up and started staring intently at the judge, which immediately caught Judge Herndon's attention. The judge, clearly not in the mood for distractions, paused the hearing and asked, "Who's this guy staring at me?" Walters, probably already flustered by the interruption, introduced him as Kim Blandino, a name that might as well come with a warning label in courtrooms. Blandino, with a history of filing frivolous lawsuits and involving himself in legal matters where he has no business, claimed he was a co-plaintiff with Walters in an unrelated civil case.
Okay, are you an attorney? No. Then you need to sit down and quit staring at me like somehow you need to talk to me or whatever.
I do need to. Make a record?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to make a record about you in a minute, but you need to sit down and be quiet because you're not a plaintiff or a defendant in my criminal case. You're not an attorney. You can't appear in my criminal case and act like an attorney, so sit down and be quiet.
Judge Herndon wasn't having any of it. He quickly told Blandino to sit down and stop staring. But instead of backing down, Blandino shook his head in defiance. The judge's patience wore thin, and he sternly ordered Blandino out of the courtroom, telling him his behavior was unacceptable. Blandino tried to protest, but the judge made it clear that disrespect and disruptions wouldn't be tolerated in his court. The message was simple: If you're not a lawyer or directly involved in the case, you don't get to take part in the proceedings, let alone cause a scene.
The defendant has already categorized himself as a vexatious
I object.
31.
Can I make a record?
No.
I've got a motion.
What did I just say? What did I just say? No.
I can't say anything.
No. Come on.
You're impersonating
Shut
the
up.
judge.
Shut up. You're getting real close to getting remanded.
Blandino's story didn't end there. 18 months later, he found himself on the other side of the bench, facing charges of extortion. His courtroom antics had finally caught up with him. This time, it wasn't just a judge's frustration he was dealing with. It was the law coming down hard on him. Blandino's courtroom disruptions may have seemed like entertainment to him, but they ultimately landed him in serious trouble. Case number 3, Melissa Hardwick. Melissa Hardwick's court hearing started like any other, but it quickly spiraled into a dramatic and violent spectacle. Hardwick was facing serious domestic violence complaints from her estranged husband, who was there to ask for a restraining order against her. Judge Jennifer Edwards was presiding over the hearing, which seemed straightforward until Hardwick's temper flared. As her ex-husband calmly explained the escalating violence that led him to seek protection, Hardwick couldn't contain her anger.
Are you willing to make those statements part of your sworn testimony here today?
Yes, Your Honor.
And are you asking the court to enter an order restraining the respondent from any contact with you?
Yes, Your Honor.
Midway through his testimony, she erupted, yelling and interrupting both him and the judge. She wasn't just making small remarks either. She was outright furious, shouting at her ex and causing a major disruption.
I've taken your statements in your petition as part of your testimony, but I need you to tell me briefly, in your own words, what happened to cause you to ask for a domestic violence order.
Yes, Your Honor.
The tension in the room was palpable, and Judge Edwards quickly stepped in, warning Hardwick that her behavior would not be tolerated.
Melissa's had a couple MIWs and a couple arrests, and she got out of jail in, I guess, April, and she started, we hadn't really had anything personal up until that point. She got out of jail in April, and she
My
started.
personal life is
No.
none of your business, John. It has nothing to do with
Miss
you
Hardwick?
boys.
Hardwick ignored the warnings, her temper getting the better of her, and she continued to rant. Judge Edwards had no choice but to charge her with contempt of court and order her to serve 10 days in jail. That's when things got physical. As deputies moved in to arrest her, Hardwick refused to cooperate. What followed was a chaotic scene that could only be described as total pandemonium. Hardwick fought the deputies, refusing to be taken down without a fight.
Go now.
In the scuffle, one officer grabbed her around the waist while another seized her by the hair, pulling her to the ground. Despite being outnumbered, Hardwick continued to resist, yelling and even threatening the judge. The situation was so tense that it took multiple deputies to finally restrain her and drag her out of the courtroom. But the consequences didn't end there. Hardwick's violent outburst earned her additional charges, including resisting arrest and intimidating a participant in a legal process. In the end, she was sentenced to 5 months in jail and ordered to complete a rehabilitation program that would last another 5 years. Her out-of-control behavior turned a simple hearing into a violent confrontation with serious legal repercussions. Case number 4, Dale Miller's Zoom outburst. Dale Miller's courtroom outburst became a prime example of the new challenges brought on by virtual hearings. With the pandemic forcing courts to conduct proceedings via Zoom, it seemed like a simple bond hearing for Henry Mitchell, who was accused of stealing $4,000 from a local restaurant. Mitchell's attorney, Dale Miller, was trying to argue for a lower bond to help his client, but things took a surprising turn. As the prosecutor, Eric Linder, recommended a bond much higher than expected, $5,000 instead of the $1,000 Miller had been pushing for. Miller's frustration boiled over. Like many of us working remotely, he assumed his microphone was muted. In a heated moment, he let his true feelings slip, muttering, "Who cares what you got?" But there was one problem. His microphone wasn't muted.
Judge, I'm recommending a $5,000 bond.
Oh, you, Linder. Who cares what you got?
Mr. Miller, excuse me, but your microphone is on, and if we have one more outburst like that, we're going to be having a very serious discussion with your supervisor.
Judge Corey Amanda Coffin immediately caught the remark. Without missing a beat, she called out Miller, informing him that his microphone was, in fact, very much on. It was one of those moments where time seems to freeze as Miller realized the gravity of what just happened. He was left with no choice but to apologize, though it was clear to everyone that his apology lacked sincerity. His response? Apologize that my microphone was on. Not exactly the kind of remorse Judge Coffin was looking for. The judge's reaction was professional but firm. She warned Miller that his behavior would not go unnoticed and that she would be having a conversation with his supervisor later in the day.
We'll be having a discussion with Mr. Goldberg after the session today. Mr. Linder, let's continue with Mr. Mitchell's case.
It wasn't just a slip-up. It was a moment of blatant disrespect toward both the prosecutor and the court process. In the end, Mitchell's bond was set at $3,000, but the real consequence lay with Miller, who undoubtedly faced some difficult conversations about his professionalism. What was supposed to be a routine hearing turned into an embarrassing lesson in courtroom decorum, all because of a muted microphone that wasn't muted at all. Case number 5, David Haig's stand for honor. David Haig's courtroom confrontation was the culmination of years of frustration and a deep belief that he had been wronged by the justice system. Haig, a hunter from Alaska, was in court over claims of corruption related to a state predator control program, which allowed the killing of wolves in certain areas. He had been charged years earlier for allegedly hunting outside of designated zones, but Haig maintained that the evidence against him was falsified by authorities to make it appear as though he was breaking the law. Representing himself, Haig's courtroom appearance was meant to be a routine hearing, with the judge setting a date for a new trial. But for Haig, this was far from routine. He was determined to use the hearing to expose what he believed was widespread corruption in his case. As the hearing progressed, Haig grew increasingly agitated, continuously interrupting the proceedings to make accusations against the court, law enforcement, and even the state's legal system. He argued that the evidence had been manipulated to frame him.
They're going in and falsifying the goddamn map that they convicted me with by altering the lines on it to make it corruptly seem I was shooting wolves in my guide area.
When the judge ordered the hearing to close and instructed Haig to leave the courtroom, Haig flatly refused. His frustration boiled over, and he stomped his foot on the courtroom floor, calling for support from the gallery, which was filled with his supporters. It was a dramatic gesture, but it only escalated the tension in the room. Sensing the situation could spiral further out of control, a deputy approached Haig to arrest him. Haig resisted, and a physical confrontation ensued. In the midst of the struggle, the deputy deployed a taser to subdue Haig as his supporters shouted for the judge to stop the arrest. Despite the chaos, the judge exited the courtroom, leaving the deputies to handle the situation. Haig was eventually restrained and led out in handcuffs, later facing charges of disorderly conduct for refusing to comply with the court's orders. What began as a heated exchange over legal corruption ended with a physical takedown and more charges against Haig.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Illustrating how courtroom frustration can sometimes push individuals past the point of reason. Case number 6, Isaiah Gardenhire. Isaiah Gardenhire's arraignment was one for the books, though not for the reasons you'd expect in a courtroom dealing with serious charges. Facing accusations of homicide, criminal sexual conduct, armed robbery, and more, Gardenhire appeared via Zoom for his hearing. But from the very start, his behavior showed nothing but disdain for the gravity of his situation.
Count 1, homicide, open murder, statutory short form. Count 2, criminal sexual conduct, first degree, weapon use, DNA to be taken upon arrest. A consecutive sentence may be imposed under statute if the assault is confinement. Count 6, unlawful imprisonment.
As Judge Sarah Spencer Noggle read out the long list of charges against him, Gardenhire made it clear he wasn't taking any of it seriously. His response? Loud, exaggerated yawns, one after the other, as if he was completely bored by the entire process. Even when charged with murder, Gardenhire yawned again, mocking the court's formality. It was a show of complete disrespect, and it was far from over. In a shocking move, Gardenhire claimed that his ex-partner, the woman he was accused of assaulting, was actually the one who had committed the murder of her own daughter. This outrageous claim stunned the court, but the drama didn't end there. As the hearing went on, Gardenhire repeatedly flipped off the judge, both on camera and in full view of the court.
Mr. Barbary, Mr. Gardenhire, I'm going to ask that you behave all right. I'm asking you to behave in a manner that is appropriate for a court proceeding.
He even pretended to fall asleep, adding yet another layer of disrespect to an already tense situation. Judge Noggle wasn't about to let these antics slide. After Gardenhire's behavior continued to deteriorate, she finally ordered his video and audio feed to be cut off, effectively removing him from his own arraignment.
Mr. Gardenhire, this is your warning. The court will mute your microphone if you speak out of turn again.
But even that didn't stop Gardenhire, who managed to get in a final act of defiance by pretending to fall asleep one last time before his feed was cut. In the end, Gardenhire's courtroom antics had no impact on his fate. He later pleaded no contest to the charges and was sentenced to 75 to 120 years in prison. His behavior during the arraignment was a disturbing glimpse into his disregard for the court and the severity of his crimes. Case number 7, Ricky Hand's dirty protest. Ricky Hand's courtroom outburst was nothing short of shocking. Hand, a career criminal with a history of armed robberies, had just been sentenced to 40 years in prison. That kind of sentence would be difficult for anyone to handle, but Hand's reaction was far beyond what anyone could have expected. Hand's criminal history was extensive. He was believed to be behind up to 30 armed robberies, but he was ultimately caught after attempting to rob a liquor store. His plan was foiled when the store owner spotted him on the CCTV and grabbed a gun to defend himself. The owner chased Hand out of the store, shooting him multiple times as Hand tried to flee. After being treated for his gunshot wounds at a hospital, Hand was arrested, ending his robbery spree. In court, Hand faced charges for 7 of those robberies, pleading guilty in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. However, when the judge handed down a 40-year sentence, it clearly wasn't what Hand had hoped for. Rather than expressing remorse or shock in a more typical way, Hand had something far more disturbing in mind.
You just gave it 3 years. Guess what? Sir, what's this?
As the sentence was read out, Hand reached into his sling, where no one could have predicted what he had hidden, and pulled out a small bottle filled with his own urine and feces. In an act of pure outrage, he began shaking the bottle and flinging its contents at his attorney and the court staff. The entire courtroom was caught off guard by the disgusting protest. The judge, lawyers, and other attendants were left in shock as Hand shouted in fury, expressing his anger at the length of the sentence. It's hard to imagine what Hand hoped to achieve with such a protest. But one thing is clear, it only made things worse for him. His dirty protest didn't earn him any sympathy. Instead, it led to additional charges for harassment with bodily fluids, obstructing justice, and retaliation. Rather than walking away with just a 40-year sentence, Hand's behavior ensured that he would face even more time behind bars. While the courtroom eventually returned to order, the image of Hand's outrageous actions lingered. His case became infamous not just for the string of robberies, but for the bizarre and revolting way he reacted to his punishment. What was likely an impulsive act of defiance didn't change his fate. Instead, it solidified his reputation as someone with little regard for the law, the court, or basic human decency. Hand's protest is a reminder of how, in a moment of desperation or anger, some people take extreme and unimaginable actions, only to find that they end up making their situation even worse. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.